Welcome to this week's edition of Hoist the Colors. He's Pat Madden. I'm Tim Best. Uh, Normally, we start off in a more jovial mood, but it's kind of hard to do that after the week that the Seton Hall Pirates had on the hardwood. Starting with a loss at Baylor on Tuesday. I mean, both of us knew, and a lot of Seton Hall fans knew, that it was going to be an uphill battle and very, very difficult to win that game. Which that in turn, that's what happened. Seton Hall took the L, and then to make matters worse, for the first time since the trophy's inception in the Garden State Hardwood Classic, Seton Hall lost to Rutgers in the Rock. I mean, we'll get to that because that was clearly the more depressing of the two outcomes. But I mean, let's just start with Tuesday night, shall we, Pat? So against Baylor, obviously, like I said, very few people thought Seton Hall was actually going to win this game. You and I included. And they were going to have to play almost a perfect game in order to win that one. But I do like the fact that they kept it competitive and they had it in, I think, within one possession in the early stages of the second half. But like you and I, we've seen this same song and dance. We saw it twice in back-to-back games against USC and Iowa. And here it comes again. But this time, this is Baylor is no USC or Iowa. And we got to see why they're still undefeated and one of the 10 best teams in the country as we speak.
Absolutely. And then there's no real you leave that game and you see they lost by 18 and the score didn't look as good as the game was closer than the score indicated. I thought, Kadari Richmond played, he got almost anything he wanted. Point that the broadcast made was Fran Fucillo, who, normally doesn't really, there's a lot of times he says stupid things. But here, he made an interesting point that one of the reasons why he thought Richmond should be more aggressive offensively is that he's sometimes, when he passes the ball, he's giving the ball to an option less likely to score. Now, I don't know who he's particularly taking a dig at when he's making that comment. Is he going after Wusu? Is he going after Alamir Dawes? I don't know. I mean, Alamir Dawes is the popular scapegoat right now because unfortunately he's in a horrific shooting slump. Now, there's really three explanations for that. One is, particularly in games like the Baylor game, is it because he's shooting on the road and he's not comfortable with the facility? Is it just because the ball's not falling? I mean, you could look at the shots he took against Rutgers. We'll talk about that in a little more detail. But, he had a couple of balls that went in and out. Or is the third is that he's regressing in his shooting ability? We saw a little bit of that last year with Jameer Harris in his super senior season. And, got to the point where, I think he went like 4 weeks without hitting a three.
Yeah.
Now he's not getting the action or the minutes or the opportunities that Dawes got. But on the other hand of that, when does a guy who gets into a shooting slump become a liability rather than an asset? And then you sort of look at and the problem with that is against a team like Baylor, you had to score in order to keep up with them. I mean, they have at least one NBA certified lottery pick in Jacoby Walter, who was good but not great in that game. And then you have Ray J. Dennis, who went off. Unfortunately, Dawes was his primary defensive assignment. So there's really two ways you could get at Dawes. One was the poor shooting in the Baylor game. And the second thing was that, Dennis got points up, almost whenever he thought he needed them. And then the one other question would be, where is Isaiah Coleman last Tuesday night? Only played 15 minutes. Didn't really get an opportunity to do a lot of things out there. And it sort of begs the question is, why was Shaheen Holloway not playing Coleman? Was it because the few times he saw Coleman try to play defense, he wasn't all that impressed by it? Did he not want to embarrass Coleman against, a talent like Walter or a talent like Dennis? Or what was there something else at play? which, and a lot of people go with that question, whereas, if Isaiah Coleman's playing more minutes, is this team winning? Is this team going to win game? Is this team going to lose games that they could win if Isaiah Coleman's on the court? I don't think there's an easy answer for that because, Coleman's still a freshman. We know he's talented, but we also, he's having his good games and his bad games. And to be perfectly honest, he didn't do anything spectacular in the Baylor game, which would tell you this guy has to stay on the court. So, again, I don't think I would hold that Baylor loss as it wasn't as bad a loss as USC or Iowa because it's on a true road court, and Baylor is a team that's primed to make a big run in the NCAA tournament in March. So, as opposed to USC and Iowa, who, right now might be lucky to make the tournament the way things are going for those two teams.
So it's funny how, even though the margin of defeat was larger against Baylor than it was for Rutgers, honestly, my take, I'd love to see play better against Baylor than Rutgers. I mean, at least that's my 2 cents on that. And you and I, we talked about Alamir Dawes at length, probably too in depth at times because we talk about the shot selection, right? And his shot selection, not great, especially when he's not making his shots. He just becomes a chucker because I get it, shoot or shoot. But at what point, Pat, you brought up a great point. At what point does that mentality become a liability? And I think we've hit that limit where him chucking up threes and not good ones either, not just because of the fact that, he's not making them. They're just not quality shots. He went 0 for 8 from the floor and 0 for 4 from 3. At some point, you got to look around and see, okay, Dre's been hitting it. He went 2 for 3 from deep. Kadari knocked down his only 3-point attempt, and then Wusu, he knocked down a 3 as well. I will say though, Bediako was solid on the glass. I mean, he definitely was not intimidated by Nisi down low. And even Hutchins Ever back in action. I thought he was very good on the glass. 7 rebounds in his first game back coming off that concussion. So there were a lot more encouraging things to see from that Baylor loss because it sucks. And we've seen the same song and dance against USC and Iowa where, they start off flat, they make a second half surge, and all of a sudden they're in striking distance. And this one meaning more because, again, you're playing the number 6 team in the country at the time on their home court. And it's like deja vu. We just see the same thing just happen. Like 2 weeks ago against USC and Iowa down in San Diego, we get the same exact scenario down in Waco. But all in all, I mean, listen, like I thought there were enough positive takeaways to convince me and probably for you that okay, I feel pretty good going into this Rutgers game, especially how bad Rutgers played in their previous game against Wake Forest down in Winston-Salem. And that just did not happen. And I'm just perplexed. Even though I didn't get to watch the game because I was at the Adirondack Bank Center watching some WWE live for their holiday tour. Honestly, it was probably for the best because if I was watching that game at home, I probably would have thrown something through the TV.
There was I mean when Gavin Griffins of all players and when Gavin Griffins is hitting threes and the first couple were basically uncontested, it's unfortunately it set a bad tone for the rest of the night because again, first of all, it puts them in a hole early. I think they were down 7 in the first 3 or 4 minutes, and they're playing catch up basically the rest of the night. I think with about 5 minutes ago, they had cut the lead, I think, to 3, and then Rutgers makes a mini. Unfortunately, Rutgers makes a mini run, gets it to 10 by the half. And and again, Seton Hall's shown they can come back, and they did make a run to get it to 41-35, with I think it was 13 minutes to go. And then 2 curious things happen at that point. One is Richmond's on the bench at that stage when they cut the lead to 6. And you think to yourself, well, if this is your one chance to make a big run, I get it that you don't want Richmond to play 40 minutes. You don't want Richmond to play 36 minutes. But, if you're leaving your best player and the guy who is scoring most of he's scoring more of your points than anybody else on the bench, at that one time you can actually take the game over once and for all, because Rutgers offense was in the mud until they hit a couple of baskets to jump the lead back up to 10, and they were, not being stopped after that. But at that point, if you take the lead on Rutgers, and again, you're only 2 possessions down, and they had 3 or 4 empty trips. Richmond's on the bench. Dawes couldn't find the basket on Saturday night. Nobody else except maybe Dre Davis later in the game was providing any consistent offense at all. But again, if you cannot get the ball in the basket at a time when you can take a team like Rutgers, who, let's be honest, they're sort of a fragile team, who, if they blew a 12-point lead, which they had early in the second half, they're not coming back. You're going to roll them over at that point. But for some reason, Shaheen Holloway didn't put the foot on the gas again. And that's sort of, I hate that, 4 losses, 4 examples where Seton Hall's making a big comeback, and then they just stop in the middle of their tracks, and they give the other team the chance to catch their breath, regain momentum, and then the game's over from there.
So I'm looking at this box score right now, and there are several things, which if there's several things that are appalling to me in a box score, because I try not to read into stuff, but I'm looking at some of these numbers and just, first of all, the one number that jumps out to me, Alamir Daw should not be shooting 15 threes in a game. Okay. 15,
unless he hits 8.
I mean, even 6, I'll take 6. That's 40%. I'll take that. But 15 3-point attempts, the rest of the team took 5. That's it. Like, dude.
I think we're hitting upon something else I thought about, though, in that situation, which is that you've got at least 2 or 3 guys on that roster capable of shooting threes. Dylan Adewusu, what, I think he's 35% for his career from 3, which puts him above the Magic, which puts him above the more efficient 3-point shooter than not. Jaquan Sanders, who saw a lot of time in the game. I think he played 16 minutes.
17 minutes.
17 minutes. And did he put up more than 3 shots? I mean, if you're not trying to find ways to get Jaquan Sanders outside jump shots, which is the one thing he does better than anything else, what's he doing out there? At least give him, if he misses a couple of shots, you pull him out of the game. You bring in Coleman, you bring Wusu or Davis back in, whoever you've brought in for Sanders. What's the point of putting Sanders out there if you're not going to give him the opportunity? And maybe that's on Sanders for, not being more aggressive offensively. And I think the third, Richmond's obviously the third option in terms of guys who can shoot the 3. I think part of it is that he'll take them when they're open. I think he'd prefer to try to attack the basket rather than shoot the 3. But something Seton Hall's got to do sooner rather than later is establish somebody else who's capable and willing to shoot 3-pointers. And Holloway has to encourage that, during a game. Let Dylan Adewusu miss a couple of 3s. If he misses a couple of 3s, so what? Again, you got to establish something else, because the problem, and this is something Rutgers did very well, was, Rutgers clogged the paint. They're playing a combination of a zone. They're playing their man-to-man to sort of lean into the paint. And, if you only have to guard what's the paint? A 240-foot, it's 15 by 16. If you only have to guard 240 feet on defense, that's a heck of a lot easier than trying to defend 600, which would be, I guess, 25 by 25, which is the area right outside the 3-point arc and beyond, instead of having to guard 650 feet. And if the only guy you got to worry about is Dawes shooting threes, and you don't have to worry about Wusu, Coleman, Sanders, Richmond shooting threes, then that's why Seton Hall's offense is going to get into a rut against a team like Rutgers, who could basically just filter everything in against Cliff Omenuri, and Omenuri can get 7 blocks. I don't really think, from what I saw, Omenuri was particularly, he didn't do like what a couple of other big men have done against Seton Hall. But when Seton Hall's desperate for points and they're thinking their only option is to go into the lane, it's going to be easy for an elite shot blocker like Omenuri to pick enough of them off to keep Seton Hall at bay offensively.
Yep, and so a couple other things. It's funny that the one name I mentioned in last week's episode, like a guy like this person in particular, like what he came out of nowhere against Georgetown, and I didn't think like what's he gonna do against Seton Hall? Well, boy was I wrong. The name I dropped was Gavin Griffiths, and then he does his thing. I'm like, Jesus Christ. It's funny how that adds up. And then so a couple other things. I mean, you can't shoot 5 of 12 from the free throw line in the first half. No, that you can't do that. And more importantly, Rutgers is very bad shooting the three. You cannot let a team like that shoot 50% from three and hit a dozen of them on your head. Like that is you just can't let that happen, period.
Well, and part of it is, a couple of the ones they hit were deep in the shot clock. But again, that's something where early on they were struggling figuring out the assignments, particularly against Griffins, a little bit against Noah Fernandez, a little bit against, I forgot the name of the point guard, but that guy, nobody was
Davis?
expecting it. Nobody was expecting anything. What's his first name? Jack?
Jermichael.
Jermichael Davis. Nobody was expecting much. It's like I think even the Rutgers fans were shocked that he was that they put him at the starting point guard. But then he played good defense against Seton Hall. He didn't turn the ball over much. He got the ball to the right places during the game. So, I mean, that guy was really the unsung hero, because what Fernandez and Griffins and Omenuri did were things that you sort of expect from those guys. But Davis was a guy who I think even the Rutgers fans there were like, all right, is he going to play the first 5 minutes and then we're going to bring somebody else in, like a Derek Simpson off the bench, and let somebody else play the point? But I think Davis stepped up, and he made few mistakes. He game managed this one, but given the way the game was going, that's all Rutgers needed, was a game manager to make sure the ball got in the hands of the right shooter at the right time. And obviously the result was what it was.
I mean, so I'm just looking at his game by game. The previous previous 4 games, he had 8 points total. He had 11 Saturday night. Like, it just, I thought last week, talk 2 weeks ago, talking about what happened in San Diego, and, I thought that was going to be more of a therapy session. Nah, this feels more like a therapy session, and like, uh, honestly, you know what? I've seen these on like social media and whatnot, but I really, especially after hearing the results of that game and also watching the highlights back and everything. Oh my God, I don't know if you've heard about these, but I really I need to go to a rage room like ASAP. Like a rage room is basically you go into a room and they just let you put on some goggles, they have some stuff, and you just grab a sledgehammer and just break shit. I really could use that right about now. Just let that out.
Well, I mean, let's look at a couple. I mean, I don't want to go back to, we've seen things that are worse, and there were
Yeah.
even times last season where we thought that they hit rock bottom, particularly after the loss to Siena, and then somehow they pull a win at Rutgers, out of a magic hat someplace.
Mm-hmm.
But let's sort of, it's funny, you think about Rutgers putting more faith in their bench guys and putting more faith in people in their rotation that, even the Rutgers fans don't have a lot of faith into. Maybe this is where Shaheen Holloway has to put a mirror up and say, you know what? Maybe I give Jaquan Sanders more minutes. He's obviously got a lot of confidence in Elijah Hutchins Everett because Everett's getting minutes and Everett is producing. You can say he's not the most talented guy in the world, but he's making an effort out there. I mean, Omen Yuri didn't embarrass Everett on Saturday night. That wasn't the reason why Rutgers won that game. He's good with the role he's in right now, which is to, you know, Bedanko can play 25 minutes. Everett plays 15 minutes down low. And Everett's producing. He's scoring some points. He's getting some rebounds. Maybe David Tubeck not being around. I don't know what's gonna be of David Tubeck. He apparently injured himself during the Baylor game. After he'd only played a couple of minutes in the Baylor game, and he played a couple of minutes, I believe, in the Northeastern game a week and a half ago. So, does David Tubeck get a bigger role in this rotation? I mean, certainly, there are opportunities to give him some action. Particularly, that one thing I could see, and this is a wild comment here. Maybe you bring Dre Davis back off the bench. We know last year he was instant offense when you put him on the bench, and you only needed him to go 15 or 20 minutes. It probably makes Davis feel good that he's getting 25, 30 minutes. And he's producing. It's not like he's not contributing, but I think it was that change of pace element that made Davis that much more effective, because bench players sometimes are harder to game plan than the starting lineup. So if let's say you bring Davis in 5, 8, 10 minutes into the game, and you just let Davis go for a 10 or 12-minute stretch, maybe he's more effective that way. And I know it's controversial because in theory, Davis has been the second best player in the team this year.
Which he has.
And a lot of people would rather bench Dawes or Wusu at this point for Coleman. But maybe you go back into what worked last year with Davis, and you let Davis come off the bench, and you sort of, and that's where David Tubeck might come in handy. And then of course the question is maybe not if Isaiah Coleman starts, but when. Do you throw him in the lineup on Wednesday? Do you throw him in the lineup Tuesday night against Monmouth and just let it ride and see what happens, and use that and the Missouri game as sort of your test drive to see whether or not Coleman can handle being in the starting lineup for when they play Connecticut? And the other thing you don't lose if you let Coleman start is, Coleman feels important. You invest in Coleman being something that you're building upon. I mean, we all know what Coleman's potential is. And then, of course, there's the rumblings on the side that guys like Isaiah Coleman tend to transfer out after, if he shows out for a year, then do you have to worry about somebody swooping in with a ridiculous NIL deal and Coleman going to, a place like an Auburn or a place like Mississippi or a place like, North Carolina or something like that. But I mean, if you make the investment in Coleman on the court and you say, hey, look, this is the start of, what you're going to be. You're going to be right now our starting small forward or shooting guard or whatever position Holloway chooses to put him in. You're our starter now. And, we're going to see what you can do in this position. And maybe that's an opportunity to make Alamir Dawes your, an off the bench threat. Maybe it's something where if all you ask him to do is you bring him in for 5-minute stretches to shoot a couple of threes to put a few points on the board, maybe that shakes Dawes out of his slump, as opposed to making him play 30 to 35 minutes. Look, let's say one other thing about Dawes. Dawes puts out a full effort on the court. When that guy is hustling on defense, he's scrapping for loose balls. I mean, those are things that that don't get measured in a box score.
Yeah.
that Dawes gives you on the other end of the court. But maybe that's affecting his shooting because you're asking him to play more minutes than they did last season when they had the rotation of Dawes and Davis and Richmond and Femi Odukali, and they were all basically sharing the minutes amongst themselves. And you weren't making Dawes play 30 to 35 minutes a game.
I mean, yeah, honestly, yeah. The more you sold it, yeah, that has some merit to it. I'm more so on the point about Dawes. I think with Dre, I'm one of those people like his output has been too good to relegate to the bench. And I mean, anytime anyone gets like relegated to the bench, obviously it's going to have like a psychological effect. Some guys like they will feed into it and they will accept the challenge. Other guys, not so much. And I can't speak to whether or not Dre or Al would be up to that because I'm not in their heads. I don't know. I don't know how they think. But in terms of which between those two, who would be the better microwave kind of player off the bench? I think the answer is pretty clear. It's Al. And you brought up a good point in terms of the defensive effort that he and the hustle that he puts in on the court. In a way, yeah, I think it can potentially affect his shots because he might not have not enough juice in the legs because really the power in someone's shot, a lot of it comes in the leg because you gotta come up, have those knees bent and then put up knees bent. You can't because with shooting, I mean, yeah, you could do all arms, but more often than not, like arms aren't going to be enough. You need to get that power from your legs, and if you don't have that power because you're worn out from all the effort you're putting in on defense, like yeah, you're probably not going to make some shots, and it's going to be hard for you to get the ball to go in the basket, especially from long range. So yeah, I think that's plausible, and I maybe if it's either him or Ade Wusu, I think that is kind of the opportunity where you give Isaiah Coleman the opportunity to, crack the starting lineup. But, again, a lot remains to be seen because who knows how what Shaw's thinking right now, because who knows if he's thinking, do I keep the status quo or do I want to switch a couple things up to the starting lineup to maybe alter our momentum and try to get it back on track by doing something different, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So with that in mind, I I think Shaw he doesn't want to fall into insanity, and especially with how the Big East is. It's very top heavy right now. I mean, everyone knew this going into the year. UConn, Marquette, and Creighton are clearly the three top teams in the conference. But then you look around the rest of the league. Butler has risen all the way to what, 8-2, and I think Providence is 8-2 as well. Villanova, no one knows which team is going to show up for them, and I'm feeling I'm going into a rant talking about the rest of the Big East. I feel like I'm recording an episode of the Igloo now, but there's room, there's room for Seton Hall to make the middle of the pack, but right now, with how they're lined up and how they've been playing, they do not look like that right now. Like, you have the top three everyone talks about in the league. Right now, Seton Hall looks like they're in the bottom three, along with Georgetown and DePaul, and that's not good company to share, my friend.
No, it's look, it's funny that a lot of people are talking about these teams that can't apparently play defense, and that you look at some of the other teams. You look at the teams in the middle of the league with their offensive ability, and I think there are going to be, unfortunately, there are going to be games in the Big East. You're going to need to score to win. They're going to be nights that the Butler players shoot out of their minds because they've got guys who can legitimately. They've got guys who night in and night out can put the ball in the basket. When you play Providence, you've got to go against Hopkins, Carter, Jaden Pierre, Joshua. Those guys can score points. You play against even Georgetown. Georgetown doesn't play much defense, but you're playing Epps, you're playing Styles, you're playing Heath. I mean, those guys can put. They're going to be nights. Even DePaul. DePaul has a bunch of guys who can put the ball in the basket. So I mean, at some
Yeah,
point,
but they play no defense.
well, they don't. They may play less defense than Although they played good defense against Louisville on Saturday, if that means anything.
Yeah, the
Point
single
is,
committee game of the year.
the goal in basketball is score more points than the opponent.
Yep.
But then the point is you have to score points. You can't just sit there and say, well, you know what, we're gonna clamp down on opposing offenses. And some nights that's easier said than done, particularly against those middle of the pack schools. I don't even talk about what happens when they play Connecticut next week, because all those teams we just mentioned, who we think have a lot of scary weapons, you double that with Connecticut, and that's just something where you've got to the only way even good teams beat Connecticut is you're going to need people to have off nights to beat a team like Connecticut in the Big East. But in terms of, I mean, let me say something a little bit off the wall here.
Okay.
12-8 in the Big East, even if they go 6-5, even they go 6-5 non-conference, puts them in the conversation for an NCAA tournament bid. And the reason for that is that to get to 12 wins in the Big East, you're going to have to get some quality wins to be part of that 12. Maybe you have to win games at Butler and St. John's and Villanova to get to 12-8 or to get to that level. So you're going to have to get some big wins just to get to a 12-8 number, so that, if you're 18-13 at the end of the regular season, they will have some quality wins, because you can't win 18 games at this point without getting a few of those in the bank. So I think that's something, you want to shoot to win every Big East game possible, but you got to find, like, for example, the back end of next week is a trip to Xavier. Their big win against Cincinnati Saturday night notwithstanding, they've lost games in that building to Delaware and Oakland. Mm-hmm. And, no slight to Delaware and Oakland, who are, solid mid-major schools, but Seton Hall's better than Delaware and Oakland.
Yep.
So, again, if Seton Hall puts out the effort they're capable of, a game at Xavier is very winnable. And then, then you get a week and a half off, and then you go up to Providence. And, without going into too much detail, because that's 3 weeks away, I mean, Providence might have a good record, but, Providence has had some games when, for example, the game they played against Oklahoma on Tuesday night, they forgot how to score in the second half. Mm-hmm. So that's another one that, if you can find a way to stop Hopkins, Carter, and Oduro, then, you can keep a game up in Providence competitive. So you got to find a way to win most of the winnable games you have left on your schedule. I mean, you got to concede that, it'd be a miracle not to go 0-6 against Creighton, Connecticut, and Marquette. That's if they go 1-5, that's a miracle, just to get one of those wins against those 6 games. So then you have 14 Big East games left, and they're putting themselves in a hole again by having to win 12 of them. But, again, the flip side is that how many of those teams are markedly better than Seton Hall right now? I think that's an open question, considering that almost all of them have had their struggles. And even Butler needed double overtime to lose even needed double overtime in Hinkle to beat a Cal team that walked into that building with a 3-5 record. So I think even Butler's got questions they're going to have to answer going in the Big East play. And, we catch them, I think, in the middle of January. So, that's another one where, you got to say to yourself, hey, there's a path to winning. There's a path to winning 11 or 12 Big East games, and you're going to need to do that at least to be in the conversation for an NCAA tournament bid.
So, all right. So here's my take on everything. So first off, you bring up a good point about Xavier beating Cincinnati. Their players, even after losing to Oakland and Delaware, they still came out with the kind of intensity that rivalry game required, and they beat an undefeated Cincinnati team. I don't care the kind of awful competition that they played prior. They were still undefeated, and they handed them their first L of the year. So kudos to Sean Miller and the Muskies on doing that. obviously non-conference play, you want to root on your Big East compadres so that, if you beat them, the win looks a lot better. But so the point I'm going to make here is that for some reason, I just still can't understand, even though I didn't watch the game in full, I only watched highlights. And I just heard from people who were in the building, it's just the team just lacked the intensity required to win that game, which is completely the antithesis of exactly what I said. Like just last week, I'm like, hey, I know we've beaten them 2 years in a row, and that we've had their number winning 6 of 8 and not losing in the Rock at all. Do not come into this game thinking that it's just because they're coming to the Rock that's an automatic W. That is not what's going to happen, because if you do that, you're going to slip into complacency, and that opens the doors for Rutgers to come in and win that kind of game. And the fans brought it, and unfortunately, the team came out flat, and Rutgers came out on a mission to flip the script and finally win one in Newark for the first time since the official Garden State Hardwood Classic began, with the trophy on the line. They simply put, they wanted it more than Seton Hall did. And on your home court with that kind of crowd, that just can't happen. That's just inexcusable. Shaw knows it. The players know it. And it's good that Shaw addressed that. And I also appreciate the fact that he actually took that on himself. Like he's like, I could have done better to instill that kind of intensity and the motor to not only win the game, but like send a message.
So now the question is, what are the consequences to that? To get back to stuff we talked about 5-10 minutes ago, who gets their minutes chopped off? Who gets a quicker hook if they're not producing right off the bat? Do you then sort of, is this where you sort of cut Dawes's minutes to send the message that his chuck and pray mentality isn't going to be tolerated? I mean, Holloway talked a little bit in the press conference about he's going to look at film with Dawes and try to establish ways that Dawes can produce on offense when he's not shooting threes, which is sort of all well and good. But this is Dawes' 5th year playing college basketball. So, you're going to be able to teach an old dog new tricks in terms of, all right, my shooting's off, but I can do other things to help the team win. Do you bench Dylan Adewusu for not being more aggressive offensively and say, hey, look, not for nothing, I get it that you're playing with 3 other alpha dogs offensively, or guys who want to get their shots up in Richmond, Dawes, and Davis. But you have to be a little more aggressive offensively, because, you need to have 5 guys playing on offense in order for defenses to not clamp down, particularly the way Rutgers did on the inside. So if Wusu's not being more aggressive offensively, do you sort of put him on the back burner and say, if you're not going to shoot, we'll bring somebody in who will? And sort of stuff like, I mean, that's sort of where, again, you look at Rutgers is willing to shake their lineup up. Even Villanova is willing to shake their lineup up when they're not getting things the way they want it to happen. So that's sort of something in Holloway. I get he's got a veteran starting lineup. Everyone is a senior or better, but when these guys they've been playing basketball their whole lives, and sometimes a coach has to tell those guys, you know what, if you're not doing what we're expecting you to do, and you're bring the intensity all you want, but if you're not doing what we're expecting you to doing, then the lesson that every basketball player understands is that you don't want to sit on the bench. Yep. The worst place in the world for a basketball player not playing well is being forced to sit next to his coach and basically have to hear his coach tell him, you're not meeting our expectations. Look what's happening, good or bad, because you're not producing out there. And that's sort of something which Holloway may have to do. You would hope that guys like Dawes and Wusu, and if you have to go to Davis to do this or somebody else, you would hope that guys have the maturity to, sort of respond to that message. Again, if you're just leaving them out there and giving them their 30 minutes a game and putting no consequences when they're not playing well, they're going to continue to sort of just do their thing and sort of languish around the rest of the season. So, and that's going to, and then you're going to start piling up the losses. And then by the time we get to the 1st of February, the season's practically over.
Yeah. So with that in mind, like, listen, like, forget about because it's bragging rights. The Rutgers game was a must win because going into Big East play, if you're Seton Hall, you needed to have at least one power conference win before Big East play begins. And that was probably their best opportunity up to that point. Even on compared to the neutral court games against USC and Iowa, that was their most winnable opportunity. And they let it slip out of their hands because, lack of preparation and not having the same level of desire to want to win that game that Rutgers did. Rutgers played super hungry. They played and executed much better than Seton Hall did because they wanted him more and were determined. So they executed better. They were in the better mindset to, I guess, to channel Providence and Kim English's mentality. Like, they were the better mindset to go in and win that basketball game. And now, I hate to say it, Missouri's a must win at this point. Like, obviously you want to win. At this point, you kind of need to win that game. Obviously, take care of business against Monmouth, although Monmouth is not going to be a pushover by any stretch of the imagination because King Rice clearly knows what he's doing at Monmouth. And now that they're, in a better conference than the CAA, they're a better team and a better program now, and obviously is a testament to King Rice and what they're building down in West Long Branch. But what Monmouth's not going to roll over for you because they went into Morgantown, beat West Virginia. But you've got to take care of your business against Monmouth on Tuesday, and then I hate to say it, but again, you have to beat Missouri on Sunday in Kansas City. You have to beat them.
I guess that's sort of. I mean, it's hard to say what direction do I want things to go.
Yeah.
Obviously, you want to be contending for an NCAA tournament bid. Is that a reach at this point, given how bad the first month and week of the season have got? The first 9 games of the season, is that a reach? So that you say, hey, you need Missouri. I mean, Missouri's probably not going to be I mean, it's on the road. It might end up being a quad one, whatever they call a quad one win, but I don't know what they are in the net, and it doesn't really matter because they don't measure it for real until March.
Yeah.
But you need to be in a better. I sort of would take the position you need to be in a better place in terms of where your team is at than you are right now for 9 days from now when Connecticut marches into the Rock. Now, again, whether that's just a game where you just want to keep it close or, whatever the circumstances are, they need to play a lot better. They need to play a heck of a lot better. And you can't just, that's just sort of one thing where things that aren't working right now need to be working. The offense needs to be playing a lot better than it has most of the season. The defense has to be better. You have to close out on shooters better than this team does on occasion. And again, that then translates to the rest of the Big East. When you're playing Xavier, when you're playing Providence, when you're playing Butler, when you're playing St. John, it has to translate to those types of games because there are very few teams in the Big East that don't have 3-point shooters that can beat you and multiple 3-point shooters that can beat you. So on the one hand, the offense has to become more efficient and certain guys, you have to sort of, balance the shooting a little bit and find a second or a third guy to shoot who can shoot the 3-pointers to keep opposing defenses honest. And on the other hand, you have to do a lot better job protecting the arc than this team apparently has done in games against quality opponents so far. And, Monmouth will be a little bit of a test because you play King Rice's son, Xander Rice, who is capable of putting up 20, 25, 30 points on a given night. and then you play a team like Missouri, who plays, who's not a big team, but that they have some weapons. They have guards who can shoot the ball and guards who can score on you. And that's another, that's sort of something where that's a test of the defense. That's a test to see, will Seton Hall do a better job closing out on shooters than they have done through most of the last 2 or 3 weeks.
I hate to admit it. I mean, because obviously you want to see this team do well, but as everything stands right now, like, I don't know. I just see them getting a split. I think they'll win against Monmouth. They're not going to blow them out. Monmouth's going to make it a game. And by the way, Monmouth's actually in the CAA now. I had it backwards. They were obviously Metro Atlantic, so they're in the CAA now. But I think Monmouth's going to put up a fight. Seton Hall's going to win a tight one. And then basically on a road game against Missouri in Kansas City, I just don't know if Seton Hall's going to have enough to win that game, to be honest with you. I think Seton Hall, I think they'll keep it close, but I just don't see them winning that game, which will suck because they'll be 6-5 going into a game where the reigning national champs are coming to town. And it's fitting, Dan Hurley, back playing his coaching against his alma mater to start Big East play. I mean, that's good and all, but like Seton Hall, if you really want to take some momentum going into that game, which that's a huge, huge opportunity to pick off the reigning national champs at home, just like you did a year ago. But it's going to mean more considering where UConn is as the defending national champs and still a top 5 team in the country. And right now, the team that I at least think is the best looking team in the conference as it stands today. But in order to get that momentum that you need, because you don't want to coming in limping at 6-5 going into UConn. Like I said, you kind of need to beat Missouri if you want to have any momentum to take into a game where you're going to need a lot of momentum and have to be playing good ball. And on that kind of roll to beat a team of UConn's caliber. But I feel like the big thing is, you might agree with me, I'm going to just try my best not to set any expectations, I'm going to watch these guys, and I would hope that they beat Monmouth. But if I put my expectations too, I was like, oh, I expect to beat them, and then we somehow don't. That's going to be a major letdown. So I'm just going to do my best because I expected us to beat Rutgers, and look what happened. So I'm not going to get fooled again. So I'm just going to watch some ball. Hopefully the Pirates win, but not. And I guess that's my little PSA for everybody. Just don't go into it expecting any certain results, because when you do, you're either going to get let down, but on the negative side, if you're expecting it now, and then you get that and might get worse, it's going to suck even more. So that's where I'm at.
Make the adjustments you have to make. Get some players playing a little bit better than what they should be playing. And I think it's just, you want to take this week as a matter of getting things right. I mean, I think we said that other times during the first 6 weeks of the season, but if any week is get right week, we're in it right now. Play closer to your potential than you have the first 9 games of the season. And then if for example, if Dawes gets out of a shooting slump, wonderful. If you've established Coleman as more of an offensive threat, wonderful. If you've established Sanders as more of a 3-point shooting threat, wonderful. Get something out of these next 2 games that you can at least, put in your bank of things that you're capable of doing, so that when you get to these Big East games coming up starting next week, you've got some I don't know what the best way of putting it. You've got something to work with, so that when you take on this tougher competition, particularly Connecticut next week, you're not going in there sort of your hands up and hoping that and just hoping that you catch Connecticut playing the worst game they're going to play this season to get a win. You can do some of the things you did last season when Seton Hall took it to Connecticut in that second half of the Prudential Center.
So I guess this is probably a good place to end it, because I feel like, the longer this goes on, the worse I'm going to end up, because let's be real. Last week sucked. So I'm just hoping that if this is rock bottom, then I hope that it's only going to get that the only way I see it is that it's going to go up, and hopefully it starts with a win against Monmouth, and then they play a quality game against Missouri, and hopefully they actually get a power conference win before Big East play starts. I'm hoping for it, but I'm not expecting it, because when I do, that's when it's going to get let down, and yeah, it's again, I'm just beating a dead horse here. So that I think that's probably the best place to end it. So that's gonna do it for this edition of Hoist the Colors. On next week's episode, we're gonna be, recap the final couple non-conference games, and then get into the stuff that everyone's looking forward to. Big East play starting, of course, that big game against UConn, and then hopefully we get a Festivus miracle by getting a road win at the Centos Center. And you know what? With Festivus being, Pat, you and I, we're talking about, getting a guest, our guy, the current Bluebeard Army student section president. We definitely want to get him on. So this is our, we're putting our bat signal out there for him to come on for next week. But, I guess with Festivus being next week, maybe that'll be a good time for some airing of grievances, if that's okay with you.
Well, we'll see. I mean, again, we'll see what happens. I think we aired enough grievances today to make up for whatever. I think unfortunately you get to that. Did we get to the point where if they, let's say, start 0-4 in Big East play, and they're 6-9 or whatever the record is at that point, is that just the point where you're sort of like, all right, when do we start talking about what happens next year? When do we start talking about being afraid that these guys are going to jump into the transfer portal? Whatever the situation is going to be. I mean, there's going to be all sorts of bad stuff. There's already enough sort of stuff bubbling up on the surface, but then you get to, all right, when do we have to sort of, empty the water from the boat, so to speak, and make sure that the ship doesn't entirely sink. So we'll see, one game at a time, and if it turns out that they continue to play the way they've been playing, then January and February are going to be some interesting months, so to speak, for Pirate Nation.
Yeah, I'm trying my best, and I urge Pirate Nation, please do not be like Chicken Little and yell that the sky is falling. I know shit's pretty bad right now, but do not, for the love of God, just do not start declaring the sky is falling. Because obviously things aren't looking great, but and I gotta tell myself this: everyone, just take a deep breath. Let's just get through Monmouth. Hopefully, beat them. Play well against Missouri, and then go from there. But Pat, you said it best: just one game at a time. And it's hard for me to tell myself that, because I tend to look ahead way too often. But anyways, I think that's a proper place to end this episode of Hoist the Colors. So for Pat Madden, I'm Tim Best. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, onward to Tonia. Take care, y'all.